Over on Jaguar 7, a new baseball video is out. In this video, we talk about the player on the Marlins who in 2000 lied about the dumbest thing imaginable and tried to cover it up in an even stupider way. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. Once you get to the bottom of the NFL draft, you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. And yes, there is a ton of research that goes into these picks, and a lot of hard work done by the scouts, so none of this is to diminish the efforts of anyone involved. However, when you get into the 200s, you're just looking for bodies. If they can make the roster, that's a successful pick, especially back in 1970 when resources were quite limited. During the 1970 NFL Draft, there were 26 players to get chosen in the 9th round. Of those 26 players, 12 of them, or nearly half, never played a single game in the NFL. Guys like Bill Bridges, Roy Robinson, Charlie Blossom, George Morrow, and Charlie Evans all got the news that their name had been chosen, and then never played. If you're in the 9th round, and you can find a guy that actually contributes in some way, you did well. If you can find a starter, that's a massive success. And if you can find a Pro Bowler, and find a guy who plays for a long time in the NFL, and is one of the best at his position, you hit a home run, because that is incredibly rare. In fact, at the 1970 NFL Draft, only 2 players made a Pro Bowl who were chosen in the 9th round. One of them was linebacker Dave Washington, chosen by the Denver Broncos with pick number 219, who made the Pro Bowl with the San Francisco 49ers in 1976 as their starting right side linebacker. The other? The man that you've been watching this whole time, fullback Jim Otis. Which raises the question, why did he fall all the way to the 9th round? Was he an overlooked prospect that went to a small school? Did he not have great numbers in college? Did he test poorly or have some off-the-field concerns, like interest in playing another sport or pursuing another career, or some legal concerns that needed to be addressed? Well, the answer is none of these. None at all. Turns out, his stock slipped, and he lost thousands upon thousands of dollars in the process, all because of a lie and a false rumor that was treated as fact. Yep, I talked about something like this yesterday with one fullback, talking about how Northern Illinois fullback Mark Keller had his stock tanked because of this. And you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And I'm going to talk about it again today with another fullback. Because this is the story behind Jim Otis, and one of the worst lies in the history of the NFL Draft. Before I talk about the lie that tanked his stock, we need some context to understand just who Jim Otis was, and how good of a player he was in college. Because when he was in college, there were few runners in the country, especially up the middle, who were more feared than he was. You couldn't possibly bring him down by yourself. The story of Otis is quite remarkable as to how he even got to play college ball. When he was a junior in high school, his coach said that he was not a fullback, had no future at that position, and because of this, was now going to play tackle. That bizarre position change was thrown out the window when the man who replaced Otis at fullback got injured. Otis came into the game and scored all 16 points in a 16-12 victory. Ever since that day, he was a fullback for good, and an awfully good one at that, to the point where Ohio State wanted his services. Granted, it seemed like Otis and Ohio State were a fit ever since Otis was born on April 29, 1948, seeing as he was not only born in Ohio, spent his whole life in Ohio, and went to just about every Buckeye game, but the first man to congratulate his dad on becoming a father was Ohio State football coach Woody Hayes, since he and Otis's father were roommates in college. So that might have helped just a tad. As Otis said, when I first got to Ohio State, I was quite aware of what people would say. They figured the only reason I was here was because Coach Hayes and my father were college roommates and close friends. I was determined to prove that I belonged as a football player. I knew if I looked bad, I'd be making Coach Hayes look bad too. Here's the good news for Otis. Even though it gave Otis somewhat of an advantage in the sense that Hayes knew who he was coming out of high school, not only did Otis get there on his own merit, but he was a really good player, to the point where every college team would be lucky to have a guy like Jim Otis on their team. By the middle of his sophomore year, he was playing regularly. As a junior, in 1968, Ohio State was the #1 team in the country, going 10-0 and winning the Rose Bowl against USC, with one of the main reasons being the play of none other than Jim Otis, who led the team with 985 yards rushing and 17 rushing touchdowns, finishing third in the Big Ten in rushing yards and second in the conference in rushing touchdowns, along with fourth in the entire NCAA in that category. He even had a 4-touchdown game against Michigan that year, which automatically makes you a Buckeye legend. And for an encore, in 1969, as Ohio State went 8-1 and finished 4th in the country while being co-champions of the Big Ten, he had 1,027 rushing yards and 15 rushing touchdowns. He was a consensus All-America player that season, led the Big Ten in rushing touchdowns and was 5th in the NCAA, and was 2nd in the conference in rushing yards. And on top of that, he finished 7th in the voting for the Heisman, getting the 2nd most votes of any running back in the country, only behind the eventual winner, Oklahoma running back Steve Owens. Now the next step for Otis was to continue his football career at the professional level. He was on the roster for both the East-West Shrine Game and the Hula Bowl, getting a chance to play in front of all the scouts, so that was already a good sign. He was projected to go extremely high, considering the fact that everyone knew his name, he had the tools to be a great pro player, and the fact that he played a premium position, as running backs and fullbacks were arguably the most valuable pieces that a team could have back then. One publication said that Otis was one of the notable running backs in this class, and from all indications that I could find based on various quotes and rankings from publications, Otis was looking like a first, or at the absolute worst, a second-round pick. The Atlanta Constitution listed a brief scouting report of 30 players, deemed the draftables, and Otis was one of the 30 mentioned. Another publication had Otis going not just as one of the first runners in the class, but going before Heisman winner Steve Owens, who eventually went 19th, so that gives you an idea of what the buzz was on Otis beforehand. And another publication had Otis ranked as either the 3rd or the 4th best halfback in the class, only behind Steve Owens and Bob Anderson. And if you don't believe me or any of those papers, ask the Cleveland Browns, who said that Otis was incredibly high on their list, and that they were looking at a running back. Bottom line, Otis was going to hear his name called early, and was absolutely expecting to be a first-round pick. But when 5 running backs heard their name called in round 1, Jim Otis wasn't one of them. Nor was he one of the 3 to hear his name called in the 2nd round, or one of the 2 to hear his name in the 3rd round, or one of the 3 to hear his name in the 4th round, or one of the 6 to hear his name in the 5th round, or one of the 2 to hear his name in the 6th round, or one of the 3 to hear his name in the 7th round, or one of the 2 to hear his name in the 8th round, or one of the 3 to hear his name at the start of the 9th round. By the midway point of the 9th round, there were 29 running backs taken, and Jim Otis, the second leading vote getter amongst all running backs for the Heisman, the man who helped lead Ohio State to a national championship, and the man who was projected by just about everyone as a first-round pick, was still on the board. Nothing about this seemed to make any sense on the surface. This wasn't a few picks off, but rather orders of magnitude off. This is almost like if in a week, Bijan Robinson, with no additional information known, slipped to the compensatory picks of the 6th round. It's that shocking. There were running backs getting chosen before Otis, like Norvell Chavers, Danny Griffin, Pettis Farrar, Bruce Van Ness, and Ken Edwards, who went before Otis, who never even played in the NFL. Finally, the New Orleans Saints, with pick number 218, took a flyer on the guy that was somehow still on the board, about 200 picks later than just about everyone expected. Which raises the ultimate question. What gives? How can a guy slide that far down the draft board and overnight go from a first-round pick and the star of a draft class to a ninth-round pick who's a complete afterthought? Turns out, as you probably guessed by the title, it had to do with some awful reporting, a rumor that was never true, and a lie that went way too far. Because apparently, Otis needed to have surgery due to a shoulder injury, and was recovering from that. Apparently, Otis was a walking red flag from a medical perspective, and had a bum shoulder that wouldn't hold up in the pros. Which, when you break it down, is an absolutely insane lie and rumor for a few reasons. Number one, Otis played in every single game at Ohio State, never missing one. Otis admitted after the draft that he had played with cracked ribs and many other injuries, but it's not like he was a guy missing a ton of time in college. He played in every game you could ask of him. Number two, since when did a shoulder injury mean the end of a running back's career? Something in the lower body, like a foot or an ankle or a knee or an ACL, yeah, I get it. Something that can potentially destroy your explosiveness can impact your career, and you might not look the same after that. But a shoulder injury? That's like not drafting a guy because he has a broken nose. It wasn't a rotator cuff tear, because that would have been specified, which means that if it was a broken shoulder or dislocated shoulder, that's about a couple of weeks to 3 months to heal. Number three, the NFL draft back then was held in January, and the regular season didn't start until the middle of September. What shoulder injury is taking that long to recover from? You've got about 75% of the year to recover from it. So on its own, that was a stupid reason for him to fall. But that takes us to number four, which is that, oh yeah, none of that was true. Jim Otis' shoulder was perfectly fine. He didn't need shoulder surgery. He didn't have shoulder surgery. They said that he had the surgery, but he didn't. And for whatever reason, however that rumor circulated, everyone believed it. No one even bothered to call up Otis or anyone on Ohio State and ask him himself or the school if he needed surgery, or if he had surgery, or if the shoulder was bothering him, or if the reports were true. They just let it run wild without any verification and fact-checking whatsoever. And it cost Otis a spot in the first round, as he slipped all the way to the ninth round instead. As Otis said on all of this, that's the story of my life. I didn't think I'd go that far down. I'm a little disappointed. A Raiders official told me that he heard a rumor that I needed to have surgery on my shoulder. Like, that's not true. He also told me I could go as low as the third or fourth round because of that report. I thought, oh no. But nope. The ninth round pick, who was a first round or second round talent on paper and projected as one literally moments before the draft started, was perfectly healthy. When he arrived at the team facility, his shoulder was fine. When training camp and off-season programs started, he was perfectly fine. His shoulder was in perfect condition. This is not a case of conflicting doctors, where one person said he needed surgery and the other said he didn't. Again, it's amazing that not only that the rumor circulated and made it that far, but that no team thought to call him up or fact-check that or verify it. And it took until the ninth round, when you're just throwing darts at the board and aren't expecting the guy to make it onto the roster, so you've got nothing to lose, for him to hear his name called. This wasn't like doctors said he needed surgery and Otis thought otherwise. This was just a rumor that went way too far. Which is a shame, because as you've been watching this whole time, Jim Otis was a heck of a ball player, and was one of the better fullbacks in the NFL during the 1970s, more than living up to his ninth round draft status, though that wasn't exactly too hard. Otis played 9 seasons in the NFL across the New Orleans Saints, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the St. Louis Cardinals, and is best remembered for his 1975 season, when the Big Red won the NFC East with an 11-3 record, and Otis made the Pro Bowl by having 1,076 rushing yards, finishing 4th in the league in that category. By the time his career ended, Otis had played in 116 games and had recorded 4,350 rushing yards and 19 rushing touchdowns, along with just a hair under 5,000 yards from scrimmage. Of all the running backs to get drafted in 1970, of which there were 61, none of them finished their career with more rushing yards than Jim Otis, which tells you everything you need to know. And if he was chosen in the first round and I said that stat, no one would bat an eye. The fact that he was a 9th round pick and he leads that stat might raise eyebrows, but not really once you realize that he was a first round talent who slipped to round 9 because of a stupid rumor out of his control that was easily verifiable and was completely false, seeing as he didn't have surgery. Jim Otis spent his entire career with a chip on his shoulder, and that's putting it lightly. He was doubted in high school, he was doubted in college, and he was doubted in the NFL. When he slid to the 9th round for no real reason, other than people are lazy and don't do their homework and believe every bit of information that's spoon-fed to them, no matter how false or untrue it may be. He slid to the 9th round because of the worst game of he said, she said ever. In the end, Otis had a very good NFL career that people look back on fondly. But at the start, he had a frustrating one that shows the dishonesty in the media and amongst high-level executives. Because after hearing the lies and the quote-unquote news about his fake shoulder surgery that didn't happen, Jim Otis needed a shoulder to cry on. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.